Those who have been in a coma, what was it like? Story 1. Back in 5th grade, I fell from a tree. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital. My experience during that time can be summed up in 3 parts. As I fell, I blacked out just before hitting the ground, or at least that's where my memory faded. Fades is really the best word for it. It felt like my consciousness was slowly draining away into blackness and nothingness. It seemed like my body anticipated the impending pain and shut down in response. During the coma, I have these incredibly vague memories of hearing my dad reading a book or my mom reassuring me that I'd make it through. But these memories were always hazy, fleeting moments, and I never truly regained consciousness during them. It was more like a brief second of awareness, like feeling the tube taped against my arm and wishing I could move it, followed by plunging back into nothingness. I might have been somewhat aware of becoming a bit more conscious each time, but honestly, I'm not even sure. The awakening was abrupt. It's so incredibly sudden. I found myself in darkness. There was a moment of realization like, my neck hurts, and then the pain surged immensely. It wasn't a distant perception anymore. I was intensely aware of it. Waking up was the most agonizing moment of my life. I burst into tears and then couldn't even cry because it hurt so much. I think it had more to do with the injuries to my neck and head than the coma itself, but that's how it felt. After about an hour, my body adapted to the pain, and I felt normal again, albeit very weak, hungry, and thirsty. I made it through without any lasting issues, and I'm doing just fine now. Story 2. There was a kid named Martin Pistorius who slipped into a coma for 12 years, yet his consciousness awoke 2 years into it. However, he couldn't speak or move, and everyone thought he was, at best, in a vegetative state. But that wasn't the case. His mind was fully present. For more than a decade, he suffered mistreatment in facilities that endlessly played Barney repeats day after day, a form of genuine mental torment because he couldn't divert his attention. He also faced physical and intimate mistreatment in addition to that. His parents remained unaware of all of this and did their best to adapt. During some of his lowest moments, he recalls his mother expressing wishes for his death, yet all he could feel was compassion for her pain. Eventually, someone caring enough recognized his responsiveness and arranged the help he desperately needed. Today, he's married with kids, communicates similarly to Stephen Hawking, and works as a computer programmer. It truly illustrates how one can emerge from life's deepest, darkest depths. For those wondering, it happened due to cryptococcal meningitis, a disease originating from inhaling soil contaminated with infected bird droppings. One moment he was just an innocent child playing outside, only for his life to be forever altered by simply breathing in some kicked up dirt. Glad he came out on top in the end. Man, that's some real-life horror movie material, even without those ghosts and jump scares. Story 3. There are 10 days of my life that I can't remember at all. I'm torn between seeing it as a blessing or a curse. It happened when a hammer driver hit us. My wife and I survived, but sadly we lost our daughter. Those scenarios on TV where the patient wakes up and everything goes back to normal? Total nonsense. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in conversation with another patient. There weren't individual rooms in the Air Force, just sick bays. It's like being stuck in an update on a computer, and then suddenly a flicker and a whole new screen appears. Apparently, I'd woken up a few days earlier, but I couldn't retain any memories. According to my wife, I was paranoid, thinking they were putting something else in my IV because I was hallucinating. I behaved aggressively and with hostility. After I hit a nurse, they had to restrain me for a couple of days. Eventually, I started acting more like myself, and they moved me from the ICU to the sickbay. The blessing part is that I have no recollection of those 10 days of excruciating pain. I was shattered in multiple places and bruised everywhere else. I never knew you could bruise some of those spots. That was a frightening realization. The curse, though, is that I wasn't there for my wife when she needed me the most. There's this lingering guilt that she faced that immense grief alone for 10 days. I understand it wasn't my fault and couldn't be helped, but you can't truly comprehend how it feels unless you live through it. Story 4. When I was in kindergarten, I got hit by a car, which led to toxic shock syndrome and a 4-month-long coma. Even now, 26 years later, I vividly remember some very strange dreams from that time. It's almost as if I visited another realm. One of my most memorable dreams from the coma involved me floating around a vast, gray-colored ocean, witnessing something rise from the water that I can only describe as a dragon with scoliosis. It moved its head as if scenting the air, then turned to gaze directly at me. In another dream, my beloved cousin had supposedly abandoned me and was now residing in the ceiling above my hospital bed with my two best friends, Jason and Jason, who happened to be twins. They simply shifted a tile aside and peered down at me. Oh, and in one of these dreams, the original Power Rangers paid me a visit, except for Tommy. They gathered around my bed dressed in their colors, and Jason even picked up my little stuffed red Power Ranger pillow. Then he gestured toward the door, where outside, on a cliff, Numb and Skull were seated at a bar, waving. I was convinced that was real until I reached 6th grade. Whoa, those dreams are gas. These experiences are why people say Adventure Time is Finn's coma dream. You think this is cool? Then stick around for story 6. The guy there went on a trip to Imagination Land. Story 5. I spent about a week in a medically induced coma. The coma itself isn't much to discuss. There's just a gap in my memory, even from before it occurred. I don't even recall the accident that led me there in the first place. Waking up from it, however, is a whole different story. Being heavily dosed with painkillers, sedatives, and such, I was essentially so disoriented. Due to the seriousness of the trauma I endured, my brain conjured up incredibly stressful, vivid nightmares that I still remember vividly to this day. I'm not entirely sure if my brain was attempting to rouse me. It was more like the shallow sleep right before waking, when you're semi-aware of your surroundings, yet also half dreaming. The former made me aware that I was in the hospital and that something bad had happened, though I couldn't quite figure out what, while the latter, combined with the medications, made the experience utterly terrifying. At some point, I did realize that I needed to wake up, but I was unsure how to do so. Moreover, multiple timelines were simultaneously playing out in my head, as bizarre as that might sound, and I couldn't discern which was the correct one to awaken to. None of them turned out to be the right one, even though fragments of reality were present in each. I lacked conscious control to choose between them. It wasn't a matter of choosing my reality, rather those delusional ones eventually faded away. Story 6. I ended up in a medically induced coma due to a car accident caused by the driver falling asleep at the wheel. The car swerved off the road, flipping over 3 times, causing a traumatic brain injury. I underwent surgery where the doctors had to remove something to relieve the pressure. I remained under for 3 weeks, during which I had what felt like a 2-week-long dream. I'm not sure how I knew the duration, but the dreams were incredibly strange. These dreams were like a series of bizarre scenarios. 1. Racing as a box of ginger ale against a Dr. Pepper in a supermarket with shopping carts. Winning made me crave ginger ale for weeks. 2. Involving ninjas, a boat, and a pending assassination. 3. Being a trapped fish in an enclosure trying desperately to escape. Story 4. Engaging in a turf war with my fraternity, actually just my friends, against a rival fraternity, both equipped with battleships. Gravy and mashed potatoes somehow played a role. 5. Attempting to flee the hospital but being too weak to walk or figure out how to leave my bed. Upon waking up 3 weeks later, I felt a bit disoriented and had to piece together what happened from the fragmented bits the doctors shared. I found myself easily amused, laughing at the simplest phrases my visiting friends would say. Following the coma, I underwent 3 months of rehab to relearn walking and speaking. The doctors noted that my recovery was relatively swift. Nonetheless, I still grapple with impaired concentration and energy levels, for which I have been prescribed Adderall. I wonder what gravy and mashed potatoes taste like in dreams. Story 7. This isn't about me, but my dad described his experience during his coma after a car accident. He had pulled up a little too far at the stop sign, and a speeding driver on his phone swerved off the road, causing the accident. He stayed in a coma for approximately 2 months. Unlike what happens in the movies, his awakening wasn't instantaneous. It was a gradual process of improvement over those 2 months. It began with one eye opening, then a few days later, the other eye half opened. He gradually regained the ability to wiggle a toe, then move fingers, and so on. According to his perspective, he mentioned catching fragments of what was happening around him, but it felt like an endless dream he couldn't escape. His heart rate would decrease whenever my 2 younger siblings and I talked to him. However, during a football game when his friends joined him to watch, the nurses had to turn it off once his team started losing because his heart rate went up. Considering his allegiance to the Miami Dolphins, it seems his heart rate never quite returned to its normal state. Story 8. I was hit by lightning when I was in 5th grade, playing catch with my best friend in a night drizzle. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance, and then after that, it had been 6 days. Apparently, you can have a lot of little heart stops when you've been hit by a bolt like that, even hours or days later, until your heart muscles all resynchronize, and a defibrillator isn't guaranteed to fix it. I remember absolutely nothing, including the sensation of falling or being asleep. It was like that episode of Futurama with the Harlem Globetrotters and the time skips, playing catch with Steven, then I'm in the ambulance with a huge black guy looming over me. Then I'm sitting up in a strange bed with lots of plastic on me. Fun fact, I was hit indirectly under a tree by a bolt some years later, and although I never lost consciousness, I spent a week as a nervous wreck, convinced my heart was going to quit randomly. Well, that sure was a shocking experience. Hey guys, if you're digging my stories about people having lucid dreams while in a coma, drop a like and a sub to the channel. I've got more amazing videos coming your way. Story 9. I experienced a brief coma 6 days following a brain hemorrhage. I have no recollection of anything during that time. My understanding of my first week or two after waking up is hazy. I've pieced it together from the stories I was told. The memories of the day or days leading up to it were temporarily wiped out, although they have gradually returned since then. It's been over a decade, so consider this with some skepticism. My memory in general is rather imperfect at best. It's important to note that my coma was induced to stabilize my condition. Story 10. During my time in 6th grade, I had meningitis, initially misdiagnosed as stomach flu, which led to a last-minute hospital visit. My last memory was of falling asleep while watching emergency news about the Brussels airport incident. Later, I had what seemed like a fever dream, but it turned out to be a real experience. In this dreamlike state, I saw my parents driving me to the ER, repeatedly reassuring me with, "It's okay." Due to my inability to move or speak, it felt more like a dream than reality. I caught a glimpse of the lights in the ER parking lot, which prompted me to close my eyes, and then it was like drifting off for a nap. Time completely escaped me. It was akin to falling asleep and suddenly waking up, thinking only a second had passed when it was actually morning. After 6 days, I woke up, heavily medicated, but true consciousness only returned the day after. My first recollection after waking was opening my laptop in the hospital bed to play Minecraft. Before that moment, I had no memory of what happened or what I might have said upon regaining consciousness. Story 11. Not my story, but a guy talked about having a whole second life while in his coma. He talked about vivid memories of his family and friends. He met a woman and they had kids together. Then one day, he was sitting in his lounge and started staring at this lamp. There was something off about it, but he couldn't tell what. He stared at it and kept staring all throughout the night. Then he realized the lamp wasn't real. Suddenly, he started remembering his real life and woke up from his coma. He said that to this day, he still grieves the loss of his family from the coma. I believe he said he sometimes sees his coma children in his dreams. It was really interesting and depressing. I'm grateful that people found it. Turns out it wasn't a coma, and the guy was just out cold for however many minutes. It's still a crazy story. Man, that's a real Inception level mind trip. Story 12. I can only compare it to when you're little and wake up at a friend's house and don't know where you are. I was in a coma for 2 months after a bad car accident. It wasn't medically induced, it was thanks to brain damage. When I woke up, I was alone in the hospital room and had no clue what happened or why I was there. I had a neck brace on, so I figured something was wrong with my neck, but was unsure how or what happened. For some reason, I thought I was 60 years old. I was in my 20s. I was paranoid and scared, but didn't know I was there. I used context clues to figure out I was in the hospital. It was frightening. After about 5 minutes, I decided to go back to sleep. 2 months of sleep wasn't quite long enough. Story 13. I had a motorcycle wreck a few days ago. Someone texting blew a stop sign, and I collided with them from the side. Not sure if coma is the correct term, but I was definitely unconscious for 2 days. Honestly, it just felt like the worst, least refreshing nap in the history of naps. I had the wreck on a Sunday, woke up sometime Tuesday afternoon or evening, and asked if the bike was okay. It wasn't. Story 14. I spent 2 weeks in an induced state because of swine flu. During this time, Oprah announced she was ending the Oprah Winfrey Show. I was very upset to learn this afterward, mostly because the TV running in my room, coupled with the meds they gave me to keep me under, gave me the most cinematic dreams I've ever experienced. Somehow, the news of Oprah retiring filtered into my brain as I dreamt about saving the whales with her in a submerged Chicago. We had a champagne brunch. It was excellent. I was also a superhero who could fly and fought my enemies on the rims of volcanoes. And then, after I woke up, and not only could I not fly, but my buddy Oprah had betrayed me into retirement. I was crushed. Coma dreams sound like VR experiences gone totally wild. Story 15. A kid I went to middle school with spent 5 months in a medically induced coma waiting for a new heart. He said that in dream time, it was equivalent to several years, during which he could fly, was stronger, but also had to fight clowns with chainsaws. He was also aware that he was in a coma but couldn't really do anything about it, obviously. Interestingly enough, there was a point in his dream where he was tasked with doing something that was literally impossible, and he was somehow able to do it. In the real world, I believe medical professionals at one point said it was literally impossible for him to recover. I'm not sure what health complications were happening during this time, or if this was pre or post transplant. Story 16. I got in a dirt bike accident during the summer between grade 8 and grade 9. I don't remember much about the day or two before, just kind of flashbacks, like a dream. I woke up in the hospital a day or so later. To me, it was like sleeping, and all of a sudden, I woke up. I did have some memory loss, though, which lasted a couple of hours. This memory loss was different than just not remembering the day or so before. I woke up, and although I knew my parents and everything, I didn't remember the previous few years of school, like graduating from grade 8. It was a full-on panic attack. I thought I was going to have to repeat a couple of grades, and then essentially I was mentally handicapped. This was in the 80s, so I didn't use the exact term. Everything did come back, but that hour after waking up still haunts me. Story 17. I'm an ICU nurse, and I work with patients in comas all the time. I talk to them, I let them know why I'm touching them, whether it be to give them medication, draw lab work, bathe them, or clean them after an incontinent episode. I'll also reorient them to where, why, and how they're in that situation. Additionally, I'll inform them when their loved ones call to check on them. I would feel awful knowing someone I took care of had flashbacks of feeling violated during a coma. Story 18. I was in a coma for 3 days following a serious cycling incident, medically induced. I woke up with zero recollection of why I was there or what was said while I was out. It is easily the scariest situation I've found myself in, but I can't say I remember it. I woke up to my mom and dad in the hospital with me and my body in some sort of traction, and that was way scarier to me. Story 19. I wasn't in one for long, just under a week. While I was in a coma, I didn't remember a thing. When I came out of it, I just remember hearing my mom yelling to the attending, "He's up!" Then I woke up with a bunch of people in white coats in the room. I was super stiff and incredibly confused. Oddly enough, I kept having vivid dreams of myself in a coma after the fact. Still have them to this day. They're almost like an out-of-body experience because I can't see myself lying in bed with people around me. This makes me wonder if all those astral projection stories are just people in self-induced comas. Story 20. In 2016, I was in a coma from March 31 to May 5, then half awake for another month after that. It was like the longest, scariest dream of my life. I was medically induced by a fentanyl drip for about a week at first, and let me tell you, fentanyl is a demon. I had wacky dreams about fighting corrupt hospital officials, so my brain knew where I was. They didn't think I'd ever talk or walk again, but in the hospital bed, I laughed at an episode of that 70s show and improved every day after. I'm at about 85% health overall these days, pretty much an average guy. Oh, it was a head injury. I had a seizure in the bathroom that made me fall onto the sink. Story 21. I was in a coma because I fell 15 meters and hurt my back. It was horrible. When I woke up, I thought the nurses were hurting me and that I needed to escape. I started hallucinating a lot and couldn't even understand that I was in the hospital. The biggest problem was my dreams. I thought I was a time traveler or some kind of god. I still have flashbacks to this day, and it is no fun. But I am getting therapy to deal with it. Story 22. It was dark. I was in one for 4 months a couple of years ago, and it didn't feel like 4 months, just like a long sleep with the occasional memory of my mom crying or begging me to wake up. I remember this vividly. I woke up in the hospital surrounded by my friends and family, and the first thing I remember asking was, I was in one for like 2 weeks. I would not wish it on anyone. For me, it was like being in a long dream. I did realize I was asleep for a long time. I was still able to feel and hear, which was interpreted into my dream. For example, my hands were restrained so I could not pull out any tubes, and my dream was that I was being held in prison. Yeah, it's kinda creepy when dreams become a dark, twisted version of reality. Hey, if you're down for more stories about life's crazy twists and turns, stay tuned for What Was Your Life's Biggest Plot Twist? Story 5 was surprising. See you there.